I woke up to the sound of strangers laughing in my backyard. Not near my backyard, not close to my property line. In my actual private yard, standing by my lake, taking selfies like they own the place. My blood turned cold as I watched through my bedroom window. A group of women I had never seen before were having what looked like a morning book club meeting on my dock. My dock. The one I built with my own hands on my own land. That is when I saw it. A wooden gate cut directly through my fence line. A gate that had not been there yesterday. A gate that someone had installed without my permission, turning my private ranch paradise into their personal community park. I grabbed my phone and started recording, because I knew exactly who was behind this. Our neighborhood HOA president, Karen, had finally crossed the line that would change everything. Let me take you back to the beginning, to understand just how perfect my life was before Karen decided to destroy it. 2 years ago, I bought my dream property, 15 acres of pure heaven, with a private lake that sparkled like diamonds in the morning sun. The real estate agent called it a hidden gem, and she was right. Rolling green pastures, old oak trees that had stood for decades, and water so clear you could see fish swimming near the bottom. Every morning, I would wake up before sunrise and walk down to the lake with my coffee. The mist would rise off the water like ghosts dancing in the early light. Deer would come to drink at the far shore, completely unafraid because this was their sanctuary too. Blue herons would stand perfectly still, waiting for the perfect moment to strike at unsuspecting fish. This was not just a house. This was peace. This was everything I had worked for my entire life. The property sat on the edge of Willowbrook Estates, a small HOA community of about 30 homes. Most of my neighbors were wonderful people, retired couples who waved when they drove by, young families who would stop to admire the wildlife. Everyone respected the fact that my ranch was private property, separate from the HOA common areas. Everyone except Karen Mitchell. Karen was the self-appointed queen of Willowbrook Estates. She had been HOA president for 6 years running, not because people loved her, but because nobody else wanted the job badly enough to deal with her drama. Karen was the type of person who measured grass height with a ruler and sent violation notices for mailboxes that were the wrong shade of black. But Karen had a problem with my property that went beyond HOA rules. She was obsessed with my lake access. You see, Willowbrook Estates had a small community pond, but it was nothing compared to my lake. Their pond was basically a glorified puddle with a fountain in the middle. My lake was the real deal. Deep, clear, and surrounded by natural beauty that you could not buy at any price. Karen made her feelings known from the very beginning. She would walk her little white dog along the HOA trail that ran near my property line, always stopping to stare at my lake with obvious longing. She would make comments at HOA meetings about how unfortunate it was that such a beautiful water feature was not available for community enjoyment. The first red flag came about 6 months after I moved in. Karen approached me during a neighborhood barbecue with what she called a proposal. "You know," she said, her voice sweet as poisoned honey, "it seems like such a waste for you to have all that lake access to yourself. Have you ever considered allowing community fishing days?" I politely declined, explaining that I valued my privacy and wildlife sanctuary. Karen smiled, but her eyes went cold. "Well," she said, "I hope you understand that being a good neighbor means being part of the community." That was when I realized Karen saw my lake as something she deserved access to, not something I owned. Over the following months, Karen became increasingly bold with her suggestions. She would point out property markers during her daily walks, taking photos of my fence line with her phone. She started attending every HOA meeting with questions about easements and community access rights. I tried to stay friendly and accommodating. When she complained about my ranch gate being too rustic for the neighborhood aesthetic, I offered to stain it a darker color. When she said my dock was visible from the HOA trail and violated sight line regulations, I planted screening bushes even though I was not technically part of those rules. But nothing I did was ever enough for Karen, because Karen did not want compromise. Karen wanted my lake. The morning I discovered what Karen had done will be burned into my memory forever. I had been away for a long weekend visiting family. 3 days of peace, thinking about how lucky I was to have my ranch sanctuary waiting for me at home. I pulled into my driveway Sunday evening, tired but happy, looking forward to my morning coffee by the lake. Monday morning arrived with clear skies and perfect temperature. I made my usual strong coffee and stepped outside, breathing in the fresh air and preparing for another peaceful start to my week. That is when I saw them, strangers in my yard. At first, I thought I was seeing things. 2 women I had never met were standing on my dock, pointing at something in the water and laughing like they were at a public park. My brain could not process what I was seeing. How were they in my yard? How did they get past my fence? I walked closer, my coffee cup trembling in my hand, and that is when I saw it. A wooden gate, cut directly through my fence line. A crude, amateur construction job that had created an opening from the HOA common area straight into my private property. The violation hit me like a physical blow. Someone had taken a saw to my fence. Someone had installed hardware on my property without permission. Someone had turned my private ranch into a public walkway. The 2 women noticed me approaching and waved cheerfully, like I should be happy to see them. "Good morning," one of them called out. "What a beautiful lake you have here. Karen said it would be fine for us to enjoy the water access." Karen. My hands started shaking, but not from the coffee. Pure rage was building in my chest, the kind of anger that comes from being violated in the most personal way possible. "This is private property," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "You need to leave immediately." The women looked confused, then defensive. "Karen Mitchell said this was community access," the second woman replied. "She said there was an easement for lake use. Are you sure you are not mistaken?" I was not mistaken. I was standing on land I owned, looking at a gate that had been cut through my fence without my knowledge or permission. I pulled out my phone and started taking photos. The gate, the women, the damage to my fence line, everything. "Please leave my property now," I said firmly. "This is not community access. This is illegal trespassing." The women finally left, but not without making it clear they thought I was being unreasonable. I heard one of them muttering about unfriendly neighbors as they walked back through Karen's illegal gate. I spent the next hour documenting everything. Photos from every angle, measurements of the gate opening, close-ups of the damage to my fence. I pulled out my property survey and confirmed what I already knew. The gate was entirely on my land, installed without any legal right or permission. Then I called Karen. "Oh, you are back," she said when she answered, her voice dripping with fake enthusiasm. "I hope you do not mind, but I had a small gate installed for community lake access. I checked with the HOA attorney, and we have historical right-of-way usage rights." Historical right-of-way usage rights. The words made my blood boil. "Karen," I said, fighting to keep my voice calm, "you cut a gate through my private fence without my permission. That is destruction of property and illegal entry." Now, Karen replied, her tone becoming condescending. Let us not get dramatic about this. The gate is for everyone's benefit. Surely you do not want to be the neighbor who blocks community access to such a beautiful natural resource. It is my natural resource, Karen, on my land that I own. Well, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice, I think you will find that property rights are more complicated than you realize. I suggest you review the HOA covenants about community benefit and neighborly cooperation. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there holding my phone, staring at the illegal gate, and realized that Karen had just declared war on me. This was not about lake access. This was about power. This was about Karen taking what she wanted because she thought I would not fight back. Over the next few days, the situation got worse. Karen started bringing friends and family through the gate like it was a public park entrance. Her book club met on my dock every Tuesday morning. Her grandchildren played in my lake water every afternoon. When I confronted these people, they all had the same response. Karen told them it was community access. Karen said it was perfectly legal. Karen assured them I was just being difficult. I realized I was dealing with more than just a property dispute. I was dealing with a calculated campaign to steal my land, one gate at a time. 3 weeks after discovering the illegal gate, Karen played her nuclear card. I was in my kitchen making lunch when I heard the sirens. At first, I thought they were heading somewhere else. Emergency vehicles were not uncommon in our rural area, but the sirens got louder and closer until they stopped right in front of my house. I looked out my window and felt my stomach drop. 2 police cars and an ambulance were parked in my driveway. Officers were getting out of their vehicles, looking serious and alert. My first thought was that someone had been hurt at the lake. Maybe one of Karen's unauthorized visitors had fallen in the water. I rushed outside to help, but the officers immediately focused their attention on me. "Are you the property owner?" the first officer asked, his hand resting on his radio. "Yes, this is my ranch. What is wrong? Is someone hurt?" We received a 911 call about threats and intimidation. A neighbor reported that you have been threatening her and blocking community access to public waterways. The words hit me like a slap in the face. I looked around and saw Karen standing in her yard, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue and talking to a third officer who had apparently arrived separately. "There has been a misunderstanding," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "This is private property. The lake is on my land. I have not threatened anyone." The officer looked skeptical. "Ma'am, we have a report that you have been verbally aggressive toward community members trying to access their legal right-of way to the lake area." I felt like I was living in an alternate reality. Karen had called 911 and convinced emergency responders that I was the problem. She had weaponized the police against me for defending my own property. "Officer, I can show you my property survey and deed. The lake is entirely on my private land. There is no public access. There is no legal right-of-way." I went inside and grabbed my property documents, my hands shaking with anger and disbelief. When I returned, Karen was giving her performance to the officers, complete with trembling voice and tears. "She yells at elderly ladies just for walking near the water," Karen was saying. "She has become increasingly hostile and aggressive. I am genuinely afraid for my safety and the safety of other community members." The officers looked at my documents carefully. I watched their expressions change as they studied the property lines and legal descriptions. The lead officer walked over to examine the gate, then returned with a more serious expression. "Ma'am," he said to Karen, According to these documents, the lake and surrounding area are entirely on private property. Can you show me documentation of any easement or right-of way? Karen's performance faltered for just a moment. Well, there are historical usage patterns and community understanding about shared resources. That is not the same as legal access rights, the officer replied. Do you have any written documentation? Karen's tears dried up instantly, replaced by indignant anger. This is ridiculous, she snapped. We have been using this lake access for years. Just because someone buys property does not mean they can suddenly block community resources. The officer turned back to me. Ma'am, has this gate always been here? No, sir. It was cut through my fence 3 weeks ago without my permission or knowledge while I was out of town. The officers exchanged glances. The lead officer walked back to examine the gate more closely, checking the cut marks and hardware installation. This appears to be recent construction, he said to Karen. Did you install this gate? Karen's mask was completely off now. Gone were the tears and trembling voice. I may have facilitated improved community access, but that is well within my rights as HOA president. Actually, ma'am, it is not. This appears to be destruction of private property and creation of unauthorized access. You could be charged with vandalism and criminal trespass. Karen's face went red with rage. This is absolutely ridiculous. I am calling my attorney and the city council. This woman is going to regret making an enemy of me. The officers filed their report and advised Karen to remove the gate immediately. As they left, Karen stood in her yard glaring at me with pure hatred. This is not over, she called across the property line. Not even close. I realized that calling 911 had been Karen's way of testing her power. When that failed, she would escalate to something worse. That night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at my property survey and realized I had been thinking about this all wrong. I had been treating Karen like a reasonable person who might respond to logic, documentation, or legal authority. But the 911 call proved that Karen was not interested in reason. She was interested in winning at any cost, even if it meant lying to police and wasting emergency resources. Karen had declared total war on me, and I had been showing up to battle with a butter knife. It was time to bring out the nuclear option. I spread my property survey across the table and studied every detail. The lake was entirely on my land, but so was a significant portion of what I had assumed was the property line between my ranch and the HOA common area. According to the official survey, my property extended much further toward the HOA trail than I had realized. The area where Karen had installed her illegal gate was not even close to the actual property line. She had put it in the most convenient location for her purposes, which happened to be about 15 feet inside my legal boundary. That gave me an idea, a big, permanent, completely legal idea. I started making phone calls. First, I called my attorney to confirm my rights regarding construction on my own property. The answer was exactly what I hoped. As long as I stayed within my property lines and followed local building codes, I could build whatever I wanted without anyone's permission. Next, I called the county permitting office to ask about wall construction requirements. The clerk was helpful and thorough. For a wall under 8 feet high, I would need a basic permit in compliance with setback requirements. Since I would be building entirely on my own land, setbacks would not be an issue. Then I started calling contractors. The first few companies I contacted wanted to schedule site visits and provide estimates over several weeks. But when I explained that I needed a privacy wall built as quickly as possible due to ongoing trespassing issues, one contractor caught my attention. "How quickly are we talking?" asked Mike from Solid Stone Construction. "I need it done in one night," I said. "I know that sounds crazy, but I have someone who keeps destroying my property and bringing trespassers onto my land. I need a permanent solution before she can interfere again." Mike was quiet for a moment. "That is a big job for overnight work. We would need to bring in a full crew and work through the night. It would cost extra for the rush job and night work." "Money is not the issue," I said. "Can you do it?" "How long is this wall going to be?" I looked at my survey again, measuring the distance from the lake shore to the HOA trail along my actual property line. "About 200 feet long, 6 feet high, professional-grade stone construction." Mike whistled softly. "That is ambitious, but yes, we can do it. We would need to start as soon as permits are approved and materials are delivered. When were you thinking?" "This weekend, Friday night through Saturday morning." "Let me call my crew and get back to you." While I waited for Mike to call back, I researched everything I could find about property rights, trespassing laws, and fence construction regulations. I wanted to make sure that when I built this wall, it would be completely legal, completely permanent, and completely impossible for Karen to challenge. The more I learned, the more confident I became. Not only did I have the right to build a wall on my property, but Karen's gate installation had actually strengthened my legal position. Her destruction of my fence and creation of unauthorized access had given me documented evidence of ongoing trespassing that justified enhanced security measures. Mike called back 2 hours later. "We can do it," he said. "My crew is excited about the challenge, but I have to warn you, this is going to be visible. A 6-foot stone wall does not go up quietly, even at night." "That is exactly what I want," I replied. "I want it to be permanent, professional, and impossible to ignore." "In that case, you are going to love what we have planned. Professional-grade natural stone, concrete footer, proper drainage, the works. When we are finished, you will have a wall that will outlast both of us." "How much?" Mike quoted a number that made me wince, but I did not hesitate. "When can you start?" "Permits should be approved by Thursday. Materials delivered Friday afternoon. Crew starts Friday at sunset." "Perfect." As I hung up the phone, I felt something I had not experienced in weeks. Not just hope, but anticipation. Karen thought she could steamroll over my property rights and intimidate me into submission. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. Friday evening arrived with perfect weather and perfect timing. I had spent the week watching Karen continue to use her illegal gate like she owned it. More book club meetings on my dock. More strangers wandering through my yard taking selfies. More of Karen standing in her yard with binoculars, watching my house like she was planning her next move. Karen had no idea what was coming. At exactly 6 p.m. the first truck arrived, then another, then another. Within 30 minutes my driveway looked like a staging area for a major construction project. Mike introduced me to his crew, 8 men who looked like they could build the Great Wall of China in a weekend. They had brought everything: concrete mixers, power tools, floodlights, a small excavator, and enough natural stone to build a fortress. "You sure about this timing?" Mike asked as his crew started unloading equipment. "Once we start, there is no hiding what we are doing." I looked across the yard toward Karen's house. Her lights were on, and I could see her silhouette in the window, probably wondering what all the trucks were doing in my driveway. "I am absolutely sure," I said. "Let us build a wall." The crew worked with military precision. While some men used the excavator to dig the footer trench, others mixed concrete and prepared the first course of stones. Floodlights turned my backyard into a construction site that was visible from space. By 8 p.m., the concrete footer was poured and setting. By 9 p.m., the first course of natural stone was being laid with perfect alignment and professional mortar joints. I stood at my kitchen window watching the magic happen, sipping coffee and feeling more satisfied than I had in months. Every stone that went into place was another nail in the coffin of Corinne's scheme. Around 10 p.m., Corinne could not stand it anymore. I saw her march across her yard toward my property line, flashlight in hand and bathrobe flapping in the wind. "What is going on here?" she shouted over the sound of power tools and concrete mixers. Mike looked up from supervising the stone laying and walked over to meet her at the property line. "Evening, ma'am. We are building a privacy wall. Is there something we can help you with?" "You cannot build a wall here," Corinne shrieked. "This blocks community access. This is illegal." Mike calmly pulled out his smartphone and showed her something on the screen. "Ma'am, we have all the proper permits, and we are building entirely on private property. You can see the property markers right there." He pointed to the small flags his crew had placed along the actual survey line, which was much closer to the HOA trail than Corinne's illegal gate. Corinne's flashlight beam followed the flags, and I watched her face change as she realized the truth. The wall was not just blocking her gate. The wall was being built along the actual property line, which meant her gate was not even close to being legal. "This is harassment," Corinne screamed. "I am calling the police." "You are welcome to do that, ma'am," Mike replied politely. "But I would suggest checking with your HOA attorney first about that gate you installed on private property." Corinne stormed back to her house, and I saw lights going on throughout the neighborhood as other residents came out to see what was happening. The crew worked through the night with incredible efficiency. By midnight, the wall was 3 feet high and growing steadily. By 2 a.m., it was 5 feet high and starting to look imposing. By 4 a.m., it was approaching its full 6-foot height and looking like a professional fortress. I dozed fitfully in my recliner, waking up every hour to check the progress. Each time I looked outside, the wall was more complete, more permanent, more beautiful. The sun started rising around 6 a.m., and that is when I got my first full view of what Mike and his crew had accomplished. The wall was magnificent. 6 feet of beautiful natural stone that looked like it had been there for decades. Perfect mortar joints, level top course, and built to standards that would survive hurricanes and earthquakes. More importantly, Corinne's crude wooden gate now looked absolutely ridiculous sticking out of the middle of a professional stone wall. The gate was completely blocked, completely useless, and completely surrounded by permanent construction that made it clear exactly who owned the property. Mike found me standing outside, admiring their work. "What do you think?" he asked, grinning with pride. "It is perfect," I said. "Absolutely perfect. We left the gate in place like you asked. Figured you might want to see her reaction when she discovers what happened." I could hardly wait. Corinne discovered the wall at exactly 7:30 a.m., and her reaction exceeded my wildest expectations. I was in my kitchen making celebratory coffee when I heard the scream. Not a shout or yell, but a full-throated scream of rage that probably woke up half the neighborhood. I looked out my window and saw Corinne standing in front of the wall in her bathrobe and slippers, staring at the stone construction like she was looking at the end of the world. Her illegal gate was still there, exactly where she had installed it 3 weeks ago. but now it opened directly into 6 feet of solid stone wall. The gate was completely useless, completely blocked, and completely ridiculous looking. Corinne tried to push against the wall like she could move it with her bare hands. She walked along the entire length, looking for some gap or weakness she could exploit. She examined the mortar joints like she might find some flaw that would bring the whole structure down. Then she started making phone calls. Even through my closed windows, I could hear her voice getting more shrill and desperate with each conversation. She was calling everyone she could think of: city officials, HOA board members, her attorney, probably the governor for all I knew. But the best part was watching her realize that she had no legal ground to stand on. The wall was built entirely on my property with proper permits, using professional construction methods. There was nothing illegal about it, nothing she could challenge, nothing she could do to make it go away. Around 9 a.m., other neighbors started gathering to look at the wall. I watched from my window as people pointed and talked, some of them clearly impressed by the professional construction, others obviously trying to figure out what had happened to Corinne's gate. Mrs. Henderson from 2 houses down was the first to approach Corinne directly. "Corinne, dear, what happened to your lake access gate?" "That woman," Corinne snarled, pointing at my house, "built this wall illegally to block community access. She is destroying neighborhood unity and violating HOA principles." Mr. Peterson, who had always been polite but never seemed to like Corinne much, studied the wall carefully. "This looks like professional construction," he said. "Are you sure it is illegal?" "Of course it is illegal," Corinne shrieked. "You cannot just build walls to block community resources." "But Corinne," Mrs. Henderson said gently, "is not the lake on her private property?" I watched Corinne's face turn red as she realized that other neighbors were not automatically taking her side this time. "That is not the point," Corinne screamed. "The point is neighborly cooperation and community sharing. The point is not being selfish and unreasonable." Mr. Peterson looked at the crude, wooden gate sticking uselessly out of the stone wall. "Did you get permission to cut that gate through her fence?" Corinne's voice went up another octave. "I do not need permission to facilitate community access to shared resources." "But it is not a shared resource if it is on her private land," Mrs. Henderson pointed out. That is when Corinne completely lost it. She started screaming about property rights and community values and HOA authority, waving her arms and packing back and forth like a caged animal. She accused me of everything from harassment to discrimination to destroying the neighborhood character. The more she screamed, the more uncomfortable the other neighbors looked. People who had tolerated Corinne's controlling behavior for years were finally seeing her true nature when she did not get her way. Around noon, a city inspector arrived to check the wall construction. I watched from my window as he examined the permits, measured the setbacks, and confirmed that everything was built to code. Corinne cornered him immediately, demanding that he order the wall torn down for violations that existed only in her imagination. "Ma'am," the inspector said patiently, "this is a legal structure built on private property with proper permits. There are no violations." "But it blocks community access." "There is no legal community access to private property." Corinne's meltdown continued for most of the day. She called more officials, made more threats, and became increasingly irrational as she realized that her scheme was permanently defeated. The wall stood like a monument to the victory of property rights over entitled bullying. 6 feet of beautiful stone that said everything that needed to be said about who owned the lake and who had the right to control access to it. By evening, Karen was exhausted from screaming and defeated by the reality that she had lost completely. Her illegal gate was blocked forever, her claims of community access were proven false, and her reputation in the neighborhood was destroyed by her public tantrum. I went to bed that night with the most peaceful sleep I had experienced in months, protected by 6 feet of professional masonry and the sweet satisfaction of justice served. 6 months later, I am writing this story from my dock, watching the morning mist rise off my lake in perfect peace and privacy. The wall has become more than just a barrier. It has become a symbol of what happens when property rights are respected and bullies are stopped permanently. Karen's defeat was complete and lasting. Within a week of the wall construction, 3 other HOA board members resigned from their positions, citing their discomfort with Karen's tactics and their realization that she had been making decisions without proper authority. Karen herself lasted another month as HOA president before the remaining board members voted her out of office. Turns out that calling 911 with false reports and installing unauthorized construction on private property were not the leadership qualities the community was looking for. The new HOA board sent me an official apology letter for Karen's actions and a written confirmation that my property rights would be respected going forward. They also passed new rules requiring board approval for any claims of community access or easement rights. Karen's social standing in the neighborhood collapsed completely. The people who had once tolerated her controlling behavior now saw her as a liability and an embarrassment. Her book club disbanded. Her influence over community decisions disappeared. Her daily walks became lonely affairs as neighbors found excuses to avoid conversation. The wall itself has become a neighborhood attraction in the best possible way. People walk by to admire the professional stonework and natural beauty of the construction. Several neighbors have complimented me on both the quality of the work and the principle behind it. Mr. Peterson told me that my decisive action inspired him to finally stand up to Karen about her complaints regarding his vegetable garden. Mrs. Henderson mentioned that she feels more confident about her own property rights, knowing that someone in the neighborhood is willing to defend them properly. Most importantly, my ranch life has returned to the peace and privacy I originally sought. My morning coffee by the lake is uninterrupted by unauthorized visitors. Wildlife has returned to normal patterns without the constant disturbance of trespassers. The dock is mine again, and the water reflects only the sky and trees, not the faces of people who have no right to be there. Karen's wooden gate is still there, sticking uselessly out of the stone wall like a monument to failed schemes and entitled behavior. I decided to leave it in place as a reminder of what happens when someone tries to take what does not belong to them. The gate has weathered over the months, becoming more pathetic and ridiculous with each passing season. Sometimes I see Karen staring at it from her yard, and I wonder if she remembers the morning she thought she could steal my lake access through manipulation and lies. The wall requires no maintenance, creates no ongoing problems, and provides complete security against future boundary disputes. It was expensive, but it was worth every penny for the permanent peace of mind it provides. I have learned important lessons from this experience about the difference between being neighborly and being a pushover. Being kind and accommodating is admirable, but not when it enables bullying and theft. Sometimes the only way to stop someone who refuses to respect boundaries is to build boundaries they cannot cross. Property rights matter not just for legal reasons, but for the fundamental principle that people should be able to enjoy what they have worked for without interference from those who feel entitled to take it. My lake is still beautiful still peaceful and still mine. The deer still come to drink at the far shore. The blue herons still hunt in the shallows. The mist still rises like magic in the morning light. But now I can enjoy all of it without looking over my shoulder, without worrying about who might be trespassing, without wondering what scheme Corinne might try next. The wall stands as proof that sometimes the best defense is not diplomacy or compromise, but decisive action that makes the problem impossible to continue. I sleep soundly now, protected by 6 feet of stone and the knowledge that my sanctuary is truly secure. Corinne learned that property rights are not suggestions, and I learned that sometimes you have to build walls to maintain peace. Justice was served, boundaries were restored, and my ranch paradise is mine forever.